Hey everyone, thanks for your support in 2024. We have a lot of cool stuff coming in 2025, and here are some of the things you can look forward to as we move into next year. In the lead up to The Mandalorian and Grogu in 2026, we'll be starting a full series rewatch of both The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett on exploring hyperspace lanes beginning in October. You can also expect a rewatch of Andor, and we will have reviews of every episode of Andor and the rest of the Skeleton Crew as those come out. Josie will be returning as we continue to rank every Star Wars thing released ever. Reviews of every episode of every Marvel Disney Plus show, including Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, The Eyes of Wakanda, Wonder Man, Ironheart, Daredevil Born Again, and Marvel Zombies, the day after each episode releases, will be available on Beware of Spoilers. We'll be having special event podcasts on 30-minute reviews for the Academy Awards, our 2024 year in review in early January, ranking all of Phase 5 of the MCU after Fantastic Four First Steps comes out, and our 10th anniversary special. Once we complete our rankings of all the Pokemon games on the backlog files, we'll be moving on to Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy. Over on the YouTube channel, you can join in for playthroughs of Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, Pokemon White, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, Kingdom Hearts Recoded, Mario Golf Toadstool Tour, Sonic Adventure 2, LEGO Racers 2, LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, and SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. Want to keep on top of all the new things we have coming? Subscribe at mwpnews.com, subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/@mwpnews, or subscribe to Beware of Spoilers, 30-minute reviews, exploring hyperspace lanes, and the backlog files on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, thank you for your support. Good morning and welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam on a very rainy Monday morning. This is going to go up in the afternoon as usual. So we actually have two topics of conversation today, neither of which are movies, because I want to talk about two things that kind of happened in the last week, both of which have to do with movies that opened over the last 2 weeks. One thing's about Warner Brothers, and one thing's about Disney. Let's start with the Warner Brothers. I think the Warner Brothers is a more interesting question being posed. The Disney is more of a theory. So Warner Brothers, you end up with this situation where it's like they released, they sold the distribution rights to The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie, which for those of you who don't know is I think it's the first ever feature-length fully 2D animated Looney Tunes movie. We've had Looney Tunes movies before. We've had Space Jam, we've had Looney Tunes Back in Action, we've had feature-length Looney Tunes movies before, but I think this is the first entirely 2D animated Looney Tunes cartoon, which is kind of wild when you think about how long that studio's been around and how long Looney Tunes have been a thing. But when the acquisition happened and Discovery bought out when Discovery bought out Warner Brothers and it became Warner Brothers Discovery, there were a few projects in development, and we've litigated this before multiple times. The idea that there were projects in development that were being worked on, and some of which were done, and rather than release them, Warner Brothers decided to shelve them indefinitely or forever and get a tax cut or a tax write-down. And some of these projects included Scoob Holiday Haunt, Batgirl, and Coyote Vs Acme. Now, we never had full confirmation on what titles had been fully written down by Warner Brothers. We know there was a $115 million tax write-down that they announced last year in February that they had gotten, but they didn't get into specifics of what projects were canceled, because there were a lot of canceled projects. Like J.J. Abrams had an original project for Max. There were Max original shows, there were several Game of Thrones shows in development that no longer are happening, which is one of the things that's considering their focus on Game of Thrones, a little strange. Why that? And it's like, well, because if they've already started doing pre-res and they've started doing, or pre-visualization or what was it, or anything like that, that's all stuff that can be written down. Okay, fine. These fully completed movies, though, were the thing that stuck in people's craw, and the one that stuck in people's craw the most was Coyote Vs Acme, because Warner Brothers went on the offensive about, about Batgirl. And I think Batgirl, because Leslie Grace was playing Batgirl, had less people willing to stand up and defend it because of racism. The difference is, when you look at, and the other one, Scoob Holiday Haunt, Scoob came out in the depths of the pandemic, and it was a direct-to-streaming release. It wasn't meant to be. It was supposed to be a theatrically released Scooby-Doo origin movie, but the sequel, Scoob Holiday Haunt, was written down the same way. So all of that said, we have all of these things kind of in play here. And Coyote Vs Acme was the one that was kind of glowing. There were reports that test screenings were positive, and all of this stuff was kind of oh, okay, so this movie was reasonably good, it was reasonably cheap, and it probably would have turned a profit if you just released it. So all of that said, after The Day the Earth Blew Up, which just came out, and came out to a surprising amount of money, considering how little marketing went into it, and how it's like Ketchup Entertainment was the distributor, not Warner Brothers, bringing down the full force to bear of Warner Brothers' advertising arm on it. Considering all of that, this movie made a surprising amount of money. So now there are talks that Ketchup Entertainment is going to acquire Coyote Vs Acme. To be clear, I'm not against Coyote Vs Acme coming out. I think all of these movies come out, and I think I've said it on the show before. I believe that if the United States government is giving a tax cut to a company, or a tax write-down to a company for destroying, in this case, when it comes to media, when it comes to this, that stuff should enter the public domain, because we, the taxpayer, have paid for it. It should be, fine, you can write this down, but it's got to be released publicly, and everyone should be able to have access to it. And then you won't get, that's how you're able to not monetize it. You can't sell DVDs. Anyone else can sell a DVD, you can't. You can't have it on your streaming service. You can't negotiate to have it on another streaming service. You can't have any ability to pick, what streaming service ends up with it. You have no right to any of that. You are forfeiting all copyright, not to the IP. You can keep the underlying IP of Looney Tunes. You're forfeiting the copyright to, this particular movie. And that's what they should have done from the beginning. And I think the issue that I have is, was this one of the movies in that write-down? Because they were not specific when they said we got this write-down what was in there. Was Batgirl one of them? Because I think Batgirl was $75 million. I would assume they're not going to give you the full recouped costs for everything to get it to that point. But I think that if they're going to do this and if they're going to sell it, they should, Warner Brothers should have to answer the question. Warner Brothers should have to answer the question: are you, God forbid, someone doesn't want to go right on red. Warner Brothers should have to answer: was this movie already written down? Did you guys already get paid for this movie from the government? And then if so, should the government tack that onto their next taxes? Is that a penalty they should pay? And then I think on top of that too, there's a bigger question that comes in where it's if this was one of those movies, and I would lean on the fact that this was probably not it. I think that what likely is the case is that this is the movie they're most likely to try and sell the distribution rights to of the movies that are there. If I remember correctly, Scoob Holiday Haunt was not done yet. Batgirl was mostly done, but I think that they don't want to sell the rights to that. Even though I think you'd probably make a good amount of money on, Netflix would probably have made a good amount of money with that. Because Netflix has historically done very well with DC properties. That was what kept the Arrowverse afloat for as long as it did, was the very lucrative streaming deal that the CW had with Netflix. And the issue is, I'm just kind of fundamentally confused by the lack of transparency and how shareholders are kind of okay with this lack of transparency. Because this is a pretty big question that's being asked. Like, even if it's not, Coyote Vs Acme, and no matter what it is, like, you're a publicly traded company and you're asking people to put in their money to invest in you. How are you not being transparent about what projects are still able to be negotiated with? Like, one project that you said, oh, we're going to take this for a tax write-down. Well, you didn't really, and you told people that you were going to, but really you kept it in the back pocket in the catalog so that way you can negotiate with it later. That doesn't feel copacetic. Like, that doesn't feel quite right. And I think that's fundamentally the issue I have with this, is this idea that, like, we should demand from, like, and I think this goes across the board of all companies with streaming, we need transparency. Like, maybe I'm dumb, and that's a distinct possibility, and I'm not shying away from the very distinct, very real possibility that I'm just a fucking idiot. But if I'm going to invest my money in something, and I want to know, is this a good investment? I want transparency. I don't want to sit here and have to calculate how many people watched the thing, because you're telling me how many minutes it was watched for, which doesn't tell me anything. Because it doesn't tell me how many unique accounts watched it. It doesn't tell me how many unique accounts watched it all the way through. Like, all that information is stuff that you're not telling me. Like, oh, well, we had 2 billion minutes of this watched last week. Okay, great. What the fuck does that mean? Like, is that good? Is that bad? Like, you gotta, like, give me a number. How many accounts watched this? And I think the issue is that once you start getting into those questions, you start getting into questions you don't really want answered. Whoa. That guy almost got into an accident. Like, it is one of those things where it's like, I don't quite get how people are just kind of okay with this. This doesn't feel like something people should be okay with, and I think the fact that it's just like, oh, well, Warner Brothers is saying they're going to take a write-down on some of these movies. Which ones did you take a write-down on? Because if Coyote Vs Acme is still out there, and it's still something that can be negotiated with, can other studios negotiate for other films? Like, and then on top of that, too, it's like, these other projects that were in development, like the J.J. Abrams show, like, information's out there about that show. Or Overlook. Like, Overlook's a little bit different because I don't know how the contract works with Stephen King and his IP, but the idea that, like, he needs to, we need transparency, especially if you're going to be a publicly traded company, and you're going to invest, your shareholders are reliant on information. It's questionable, to say the least, I think. That they weren't transparent about the fact that Coyote Vs Acme was not written down. Because when I saw that news story, I was like, I thought they had to destroy that. I thought that was the thing. They had to destroy all copies of it, and they had to, provide evidence to the IRS that they had destroyed it. Like, maybe that wasn't the case. But it's just questionable. But that's all I got on that. The other half of this comes from Disney. Because this week, Snow White came out, and Snow White was not well received. Which, if you listen back weeks ago, months ago, I said this was going to happen. Number one, Disney was kind of hanging this movie out to dry. I don't think Disney did a good job marketing this movie. I don't think Disney wanted to market this movie. I think that the whole thing with Gal Gadot and her political beliefs was something that they didn't want to deal with. I think that the fact that Rachel Zegler became a lightning rod of hate on the internet for a bunch of misogynistic assholes was another thing that they were like, we don't want to do it. And I think the false equivalency of the two was a mistake. But the fact of the matter is, they were not advertising this movie before other movies. I didn't, like, in the lead up to, what was that other one? In the lead up to, like, Aladdin, going to the movie theater, you could not escape Aladdin. In the lead up to, what's it called? In the lead up to, what was it? What was after Aladdin? Like, Beauty and the Beast. You could not escape, you know, what was it? You could not escape Beauty and the Beast trailers everywhere. You know, these movies that they're like, oh, you could, you like, I think what happened was they wanted to shy away from controversy. Like, real or manufactured, which in this case it was mostly manufactured, they wanted to steer away from it. But the question that people are asking, now that the movie has lost money, apparently, I mean, I don't think it's going to have legs, but what happened here? What went into the decision to remake Snow White? And I don't know. I'm not an insider. I don't have information from anyone who works at Disney. The thing you always hear about this is, oh, well, you know, Disney, you know, does this to retain their copyright. And I'm like, I don't, that doesn't sound right to me. I don't think that, like, that's something that's worth the effort or the money. Like, it's not worth $250 million to do that. Fundamentally, they're not going to make this movie if they don't think it's going to be a hit. The thing with Snow White is it came out in 1937. I feel like I've said this several times before, especially last week when we talked about the movie in and of itself. But it came out in 1937. It is very much a product of its era. It is very much a, what's it called? A, you know, like, it's a historical film. It's a very important film in the history of the medium. It's not fantastic. It is fine, especially by contemporary standards. You're going to have to do a lot of updating to make the story work. Because Snow White is not really a character in the original movie. And I would venture a guess that most people who are like, oh my god, they're ruining Snow White, I would venture a guess most of them hadn't watched it in a very long time. But the general idea that I think what it is that puts these movies, and why they do this, is I think it's for the parks. Fundamentally, I think that these are decisions that are made with the parks in mind, nothing more. I don't think this is a decision that's done for any other reason. At the end of the day, what Disney's trying to do is Disney is trying to sell you on other Disney shit. So that, like, the movie comes out, there's a toy line. The movie comes out, they have characters in the parks that match. Like, anytime there's a new Marvel movie, it's like, oh look, Sam Wilson's here at Avengers Campus. Like, they are constantly trying to do shit for the parks because the parks make them a fuck ton of money. And the thing is, international audiences have a hard time, you know, with these things, especially in, like, the Shanghai Disneyland, stuff like that, where they had the no Western, you know, cartoons coming in that era for obvious reasons because of, you know, embargoes and all of that. So what they're doing is they're slowly trying to reintroduce these things, and then they're trying to reintroduce it for a new audience. So when the audience goes, they're like, oh, I saw that movie, I like that, boom, let's go see. Historically, think about all the things that you think about with Disney, and think about what stays in the park. You don't really see TV. Like, we could sit here and talk about The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian will show up sometimes at Galaxy's Edge. You'll have Din Djarin, and you'll have, you know, shit like that. But at the end of the day, we don't really talk about, you know, like, all the TV shows that were on Disney Junior when I was a kid, or Disney Channel. They didn't have a huge showcase. There was no High School Musical at Disney. Like, the biggest TV shows that air on ABC do not end up in Disney World. And the things that end up there and the things that have the staying power are the movies. Fundamentally, that's what this is about. It's about reintroducing this, especially considering Snow White has such a big foothold in the parks. This is something that's kind of essential. And it's why, when you look at the movies that have had, you know, attractions and the movies that haven't, and how they line up with the movie, with what's there, it does kind of make sense a little bit. So, like, looking at, like, Bob Iger said he didn't like Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is why they're not going to do a live-action Hunchback of Notre Dame movie. I think that comes more from the fact that I don't think there's a great way to really do that for a kid and in live action and have it not feel very weird. But the point is, it's like the bigger issue here with this, with that is there's no footprint for Esmeralda or Quasimodo or any of these characters in the Disney parks. So what's the point in doing that? Peter Pan and Wendy, that's a Disney Plus ride, or a Disney Plus thing. There's a ride for that. Like Pinocchio, it's on Disney Plus. I don't think, if I remember correctly, there's anything really Pinocchio there. Like, right now, like Dumbo has a footprint in the parks. No pun intended, because it's an elephant. If you want to sell experiences, you need to keep a cycle of things to create new experiences. If you do not create a cycle of things to create new experiences, people will stop going to the park. Because what am I going to keep going to the park for? It's the entire plot of Jurassic World. Why am I going to keep going to the park when I could just, it's the same dinosaurs over and over again? Now, I don't buy that for dinosaurs, but I do buy that for Disney World, especially if we're getting into an era where travel is going to be not restricted, but restrained. As spending goes down, possibly, we'll see. But looking at all of this, I'm kind of like, that's what this is about fundamentally. It's not about retaining the rights to that, because, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that would be, they're not going to spend $250 million to retain the rights to the looks of the dress. And just be like, oh, well, other people can't use the dress now. It's like, well, no. And the other thing is, too, it's like, if it's not identical, which inherently it can't be because you're going from 2D animation to 3D live action, you can't do that. It's a thing where it's like, you'll notice some of the movies, too, that they're focusing on as well are kind of like 90s movies that people grew up on. And it's like, oh, well, kids liked this when they were kids. Aladdin, Hercules is in development. That kind of thing is being worked on. But what about, it's just kind of a situation that you have to kind of, it's fluid, I guess would be the right word to use. It's fluid. But I think in the case of Snow White, it comes down to, Snow White is one of the attractions in Fantasyland, and has been, forever. All my life, the Snow White dark ride has been there. It's right next to Winnie the Pooh, and you go on, it's air conditioned, it's nice, you go through the plot of what's it called? You go through the plot of Snow White, and now they have the Dwarf Minecart, which is a roller coaster. I think it's an indoor roller coaster. So clearly this is something that they see power in this IP. Now, does that translate to a movie? No. And I think that was fundamentally the issue here, is that the live action remakes that have worked well and have made a lot of money are live action remakes that are based on things that came out in the last 30 years that people have very fond memories of. Aladdin made a lot of money. The Lion King made a lot of money. Beauty and the Beast made a lot of money. And the good ones have been ones where they don't stick strictly to the plot. And they kind of are like, all right, we're going to do a take on this. Christopher Robin, Cruella. That's what it is. And it's like Snow White, and the thing is, too, there's right on the wall, because there was, what was it, Snow White and the Huntsman, that movie with Chris Hemsworth and Kristen Stewart, that wasn't very good. Was that Kristen Stewart? I think so. But regardless, I think there's definitely, what's it called? There's definitely a lot of baggage with this movie. I think that the ultimate decision that should have been made with this was that we shouldn't do it. Not because of Rachel Zegler, not because of Gal Gadot, not because of Peter Dinklage's comments about not hiring little person actors, not because of any of that. It's just because it's not a sound financial decision to remake a movie that is that detached from the world we live in now, and try to make it work. But on that note, we will wrap up there for today. And until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.